Russia has had its eye off Syria because it's been so preoccupied with Ukraine. So Assad's two main backers have been weakened, and the rebels have seen a real chance. You're right, it has been more or less forgotten. It's sort of been rumbling along, but it's been fairly quiet recently, and they've regrouped and have had amazing success in actually capturing Aleppo.
Let's start with Syria.
Yeah.
Conflict in Syria significantly escalated in the last few days. Rebels they're trying to take more territory towards Damascus after their quite surprising, at least to the extent that most of us were paying attention, takeover of Aleppo. And President Assad of Syria has promised to crush them, but then he says that quite a lot. Most of us have basically, I guess, effectively forgotten about this conflict, knowing it was rumbling along in the background. Why is it intensified?
Well, because of the timing. It's because the two main rebel groups, which are the Turkish-based, or at least not in Turkey, but right by the border of Turkey, have seen an opportunity. Hezbollah has been weakened, and Hezbollah has been fighting for Assad. They've sent troops over into Syria. They've been severely weakened by the attacks in Lebanon, and also the feeling that Russia has had its eye off Syria because it's been so preoccupied with Ukraine. So Assad's two main backers have been weakened, and the rebels have seen a real chance. You're right, it has been more or less forgotten. It's sort of been rumbling along, but it's been fairly quiet recently, and they've regrouped and have had amazing success in actually capturing Aleppo.
And what's the West's interest here? Because on the one hand, our governments are no fan of Assad, and the fact that he's Russian-backed. If Russia has to devote more resources towards helping him, that's all for the good as far as we're concerned in Ukraine. But then on the other hand, the rebels, as well as being a bit Turkish-backed, they're also have links with Al-Qaeda and ISIS and similar groups. Which way does our interest lie here?
Well, our interest doesn't lie with backing the rebels. They are indeed Islamist extremists and have very close links, although they've officially broken them, with Al-Qaeda. It's one of these conundrums, as they say in the Middle East, the friend of my friend is my friend, but an enemy of my enemy can still be my enemy. And we don't approve of Bashar Assad's regime. In fact, the West has really tried very hard to get rid of it, but has now basically retreated in the face of the fact that he's actually survived with more than 11 years of civil war going on there. He's firmly in power. He's back in the Arab League. So he's been sort of accepted, as it were, although not really in any way approved of, particularly because of his close association with Russia. But the West's interest really is just trying to keep out of this and make sure that either Assad or neither Assad nor the rebels win a decisive victory.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's turn to the other, one of the other wars, Ukraine, the war in Ukraine with Russia and Ukraine there, along with 10 to 12,000 North Koreans reportedly ready to engage the Ukrainians. Moscow has now said recruited hundreds of Yemenis as well, with the promise of generous salaries and citizenships. And Mark Golossi reports in the paper that there's also been recruitment in countries such as India and Nepal as well as in Africa and Latin America. I mean, I had no idea about the extent of this.
No, nor did I, and I didn't really know that they were going as far afield as Africa. I mean, there have always been mercenaries, and there have always been people who are given large inducements to join up. The Russians are terrified of another mass mobilization of their own people, because last time they did it, it caused tremendous anger, and a large number of really high-class, in other words, well-qualified Russians fled the country. I mean, up to 700,000, people say,
really? Wow.
Which is a large number. Some came back, but many stayed abroad, and they don't want that, and they've been very careful not to call up people from St. Petersburg and Moscow, where their families have much more influence and are much more the elite of Russian society. So they are desperately looking for more troops. I mean, the level of casualties in Russia has been extraordinarily high, though so too has the level in Ukraine. The Russians seem more able to throw in wave after wave of people, even recruiting people from prisons. But it's now becoming a bit like the Spanish Civil War, with people from all over the world joining up out of either money or ideological conviction, or both.
Well, I mean, so General Valery Zaluzny, is that how I say his name?
Yeah.
Ukraine's former commander-in-chief and now its ambassador to the UK. He suggested that this is on the verge of becoming a world war. Is that quite right, or is it more of a sort of globalized war rather than a world war.
Globalized war is a better phrase. World war suggests that the main powers in the world, in other words, most of Western Europe and America and everyone else, will be directly involved in the conflict with Russia, and that's not, one hopes, not going to happen. And the United States clearly is not going to up its military commitment to Ukraine. But the internationalization of this war is certainly going on apace.
Is a good word, yeah.
Yes, because the Russians are actually quite adept at using not just military tactics, but all sorts of other tactics to weaken Ukraine and to weaken the West's support, such as sabotage, interfering with networks, vital strategic networks in the West, setting fire to arms supplies that were destined for Ukraine, all sorts of things, possibly even bringing down aeroplanes that they thought were carrying arms for the Ukrainian rebels. Sorry, not the rebels. I mean the Ukrainian forces fighting Russia. The Russians have been quite skilled in internationalizing it in this way. The West has to recognize and adapt to that.
Yeah. Well, look, next door-ish, protesters are on the streets in Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia, they were there last night for the fourth straight night, and there are signs that opposition is spreading across the country to the government's decision to suspend talks on joining the European Union. Georgia's anti-Russian protests, should we see that as being a sort of part of the same battle that Russia is fighting in Ukraine to sort of maintain its sphere of influence in former Soviet states?
Probably, yes. I mean, the Russians have always been fairly close to Georgia until about 10 or 15 years ago, when the Georgians asserted their independence technically and in every other way, politically. But that has come full circle because there's this very powerful millionaire who's billionaire even, head of Georgian Dream, which is really a pro-Russian group. And they now control the government and have a pro-Russian prime minister who has cooled on the whole idea of joining the European Union, which is at the moment on offer, and there's negotiations going on. And more or less said he's stopping negotiations, which has infuriated the protesters because they see that as a way of putting Georgia firmly back under Russian control. And for 4 nights, there have been pretty violent demonstrations outside Parliament. Police have been firing water cannon, all sorts of things at the protesters. A great number have been arrested. They've got a constitutional crisis because the president, who is due to resign, having completed her term, has said she's not going to resign because the recent elections, she thought, were rigged, and therefore the Parliament is not legitimate to vote for a replacement. So you've got trouble on the streets, you've also got political trouble and constitutional trouble, and you have got, as you suggest, secret Russian maneuverings to make sure that Russia does have the upper hand still.